Hello YouTube, it's me Ian, once again, maskless to you all. And for those of you who have been asking me uh, what's happening with the monster and stuff, don't worry about that. The monster will return. He's just sort of taking a vacation. But no, what I wanted to do was that I wanted to get on here and sort of post a video response to Sly Cooper 88's comic books and why I love them video that he did. So I just decided that I would just get on and voice my opinion as to why I love comic books, and to all you other people out there, I would ask that you do the same because I kind of like the idea. See, to me, I don't view a lot of people view comic books as being like just as childish and trashy as video games or like Playboy magazines or anything like that. That's not how I view them. I'm not just into comic books, okay? You see that stack of books back there? Those are all like hardcore, super long fantasy slash science fiction books that I have. So I view comic books as being just as complex, just as interesting, and just as immersive as anything by H.G. Wells or Orson Scott Card or anything old by L. Ron Hubbard or Larry Niven. You know, like I've recently just only got into comic books. I think, like as I said, in my one of my earlier videos, it's the characters I grew up with were Batman and Green Arrow and Spider-Man. But in recent years, I've sort of developed a more expanding interest in comics. Now that you know, now that they have all these movies coming out, and they have all these comic book movies coming out, like Red and the Losers and stuff like that, and Wanted, and The Spirit, and all of these comic book oriented films are coming out. If there's, and I'd just like to sort of get familiar with the source material. What comic books mean to me are that they're just sort of, they're the ultimate escape for me. Just not just comic books, but books in general. I mean, when I read a book by, say, Warren Ellis, or a book by Mark Waid, or even the great and all-powerful Jack Kirby, I feel like I no longer live in this world. I feel like my consciousness and mind is transported into another one. And to be honest, I'm not exactly fond of comic books now that they're a lot more highly recognized and a lot more popular, because it seems like it's nothing but publicity stunt after publicity stunt. That, writers and companies are feeling that the only reason why they should do something like this is to basically get nothing but response out of the public, out of, people who aren't into comic books. Now, as much as I love the 90s, the 90s was sort of made up of publicity stunts as well, because Superman got killed, Batman had his back broken. Uh, Spider-Man had clones. Yeah, I'm not gonna get into that. Green Arrow was killed, and he was replaced by his son. You know, it was just nothing but, oh, we're gonna kill off all these characters, and but the reason why the deaths of Superman and Batman Nightfall, the reason why those stories work so well, in my opinion, is because those stories, they still stand the test of time, because they're not just publicity stunts. They're not just done to gain more recognition and to make a hell of a lot more money. They were done to make the comic more interesting. They were done to make the comic more fascinating, to sort of break the mold and just break the status quo of, the regular MO that, those running comics had. Okay, when Chris Claremont and John Byrne, when they picked up the X-Men in the 80s, that whole Phoenix Saga thing, that really changed the X-Men comics. Because it was something unusual, it was unexpected, but at the same time it was awesome and epic. And it completely changed the direction that the X-Men comics were going in. That's basically why DC did that Crisis on Infinite Earths thing, was to sort of bring the characters into the 21st century. Now, I mean, that's sort of why I love comics, is because that, there are all these great original characters that are presented in these books, but I also love it whenever they take something that's big in another type of medium, like say for instance, Conan the Barbarian. I'm a huge fan of Conan the Barbarian, and I'm also a huge fan of all of Robert Howard's other works, such as Solomon Kane, Kull the Conqueror, any. I'm big into pulp fiction. I'm big into Robert Bloch and H.P. Lovecraft and guys like that. I'm a huge pulp nerd. I'm just like my good friend Comic Book Fan 1234. I'm also very fascinated with, vigilante pulp characters such as the Phantom or the Shadow, or Dick Tracy. That's sort of where comic books came from. Okay, before comic books were really popular, there were pulp magazines that were made sort of, well, they kind of started out in like the late 1800s. There were nothing but, you see, back in those days, these actual books and novellas were quite expensive. So pulp magazines were basically just made to have many writers write many fictitious stories so that they could be sold for a really cheap price, and everyday average people who didn't have a lot of money could actually buy these magazines and read all these great, awesome, epic, fantastic stories. That's what Robert Howard and Robert Bloch and H.P. Lovecraft and all these other authors, that's what they did. They took pulp fiction magazines to the next level. And even big comic book writers today, like John Buscema. He's a huge fan of Robert Howard, and I love it when they take a character from another uh, literary source, like Conan, and they make a comic book series about him. I've read many different Marvel Conan comics and many different Solomon Kane comics, and I can't, I want more, but I mean the thing is I can't really find any of those books in the bookstore. And also, comics are also used to expand the mythology of any sort of different fictional universe. Like, take Star Wars, for example. There are many different Star Wars comics that have been made. There are also, well, if there's any company that's good at doing that, it's Dark Horse. Dark Horse is fantastic at licensed comic book properties and uh, and crossovers. Although some of their crossovers have been really bad. Yeah, but yeah, I've sort of gone on and rambled about sort of the comic book history a little bit, but I haven't really gotten to the main point. Now, Steve, I believe your question was, or not a question, your statement is, he sort of wants to start this whole chain of videos of people getting on camera or getting on the internet, sort of talking about what they want, why they love comic books and how they first got into comics. Well, hold that thought. I'll be right back.